What happens when a fearless young woman walks into a courtroom and exposes the very judge presiding over it? This isn't fiction, this is a real, explosive confrontation between power and truth. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, didn't just challenge corruption, she dismantled it in front of a nation. The sun blazed down on the red brick walls of the Richmond Federal Courthouse, but inside, the air was frigid, chilled not by air conditioning, but by the suffocating weight of what was about to unfold. Rows of pew-like benches groaned under the weight of reporters, law students, activists, and a smattering of political operatives, all crammed into the packed courtroom, waiting for the day's proceedings to begin. At the front, the seal of the United States gleamed above the judge's bench like an eye that saw everything and forgave nothing. Then the door swung open with sharp authority, and Judge Bennett Harrow swept in, black robes billowing like smoke. His reputation had preceded him: harsh, proud, and unmistakably hostile toward any organization remotely aligned with conservative causes. Today's case, involving the Unity Trust Foundation, a charitable nonprofit accused of financial fraud, had already been smeared across headlines, and Harrow's critics warned he would make a spectacle of it. His mere presence stiffened the spines of the courtroom staff. Without a word, he banged the gavel, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk circling prey. "Clerk, where's the witness?" he barked, voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "If she's late, I'll hold her in contempt." Before the clerk could answer, the double doors creaked open again. Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, entered the courtroom in a tailored navy suit, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. She clutched a leather binder tight to her side, walking with the calm confidence of someone who wasn't here to play defense. Harrow's lip curled. "Ah," he sneered, "the mouthpiece of Mar-a-Lago herself." Some in the audience chuckled. Others held their breath. Karoline paused, turned slightly to acknowledge the court staff with a respectful nod, then made her way to the witness stand. Judge Harrow leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Let's make one thing clear, Miss Leavitt," he said, his tone poisonous. "This isn't a press conference. Your title means nothing here. You speak only when spoken to." But Karoline didn't flinch. She raised her chin just enough to signal she'd heard him, and wasn't the least bit intimidated. The room seemed to shift, ever so slightly. This wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. Something bigger was brewing beneath the surface, and everyone could feel it. Judge Bennett Harrow reclined in his chair with theatrical disdain, fingers drumming a slow, mocking rhythm against the mahogany bench as Karoline Leavitt took her seat at the witness stand. He didn't look at her, so much as through her, as if she were a nuisance barely worthy of his time. The courtroom was silent but buzzing with tension, every eye trained on the clash that was about to ignite. "Miss Leavitt," he said finally, dragging out her name like an accusation, "I assume you understand this isn't Capitol Hill. We operate under law here, not spin." A ripple of low laughter spread through the gallery, and Harrow's smirk deepened. Karoline offered nothing in return, no smile, no reaction. She opened her binder slowly, methodically, letting the silence stretch, making him wait. "You're correct, Your Honor," she said, her voice measured, calm, precise. "That's why I'm here. The law matters, and so does the truth." Harrow's eyes narrowed. He leaned in, as if about to pounce. "Spare me the slogans, Ms. Leavitt. This court is not your stage, and you are not here to perform." His tone was acid. "You are not counsel. You are not certified. You are, in essence, a PR stunt, decorated with a title and sent here to spew political propaganda under the guise of testimony." A few murmurs followed, and a man in the back chuckled audibly. Karoline's eyes flicked toward the sound, then returned to the judge. Still no reaction, no flinch, no fear. "I'm not here to perform," she said evenly. "I'm here to submit evidence. Evidence your court has refused to acknowledge." Harrow slammed his gavel once, hard enough to make the clerk startle in her chair. "You will not lecture me in my courtroom," he thundered. "I don't care what your position is at the White House or who you're here to protect. You answer the questions you're asked and nothing more." "And if the question is who benefits when truth is ignored," Karoline said, tilting her head ever so slightly, "I believe the answer sits right in front of me." A gasp fluttered through the room like a bird let loose. Harrow shot forward, both fists hitting the bench. "One more word, and I'll hold you in contempt." Karoline didn't move. "Hold me if you must, Your Honor, but I won't help you bury what's in this binder." His face turned a dangerous shade of red. "You think you can come into my courtroom and throw baseless accusations at a federal judge?" he snapped. "You're a mouthpiece for a morally bankrupt administration. And you're a man who's grown too comfortable hiding behind a robe," she cut in, cool as steel. The courtroom trembled with whispers. Phones were already in hands. The clerk shifted uneasily. Harrow's hand gripped the gavel again, but this time he didn't slam it. Something in Karoline's stare, unshakable, quietly lethal, made him hesitate. She opened the binder, casually flipping a tabbed divider, and said, "Shall we begin with the Unity Trust audit, or would you prefer to start with the March 3rd bank wire?" That did it. Harrow froze. Just for a second, just long enough for the room to register what they'd seen. Karoline had come prepared not just to testify, but to dismantle. The balance of power had shifted, and Judge Harrow, once so untouchable, was now the one on defense. Karoline flipped the first page in her binder with a precision that felt deliberate, almost surgical. The courtroom leaned in, silent, waiting. She held up a copy of a document for the court officer to distribute to the bench and defense table. "Exhibit A," she announced clearly, "Unity Trust Foundation Financial Summary, March 1st through March 31st. Every contribution accounted for, every expense disclosed, independent audit included." Her voice didn't waver, not even as Judge Harrow leaned forward in his chair like a storm about to break. "Your Honor," she continued, "the audit was conducted by Grant & Holmes LLP, a firm your own court previously deemed impartial. The documents were submitted during discovery, yet you sealed them." Harrow's lip twitched. "This is irrelevant to the charges at hand." "On the contrary," Karoline replied, lifting another sheet, "this shows that the Unity Trust Foundation is not only innocent, but the charges themselves were manufactured." She tapped the paper. "And they were manufactured conveniently after a private meeting between you and the Liberty Advancement Network held on February 27th. A wave of murmurs spread across the courtroom. Harrow's eyes flicked to the clerk, whose fingers trembled as she adjusted her headset. "Stop this now," he barked. "You're making reckless connections." Karoline raised her eyes slowly to meet his. "Then let's look at Exhibit B." Another document, another dagger. This is a bank transfer record from the Cayman Islands, March 3, 2024. A deposit of $120,000 into an account under the name BH Consulting, Liberty, traced to your ownership through a corporate registry search filed in Bermuda. The deposit came from a holding company linked directly to Liberty Advancement. Gasps this time, audible, stunned. The courtroom buzzed with restrained chaos, phones subtly lifted, cameras now quietly recording despite the judge's earlier warnings. Harrow grabbed his gavel and slammed it. "This is outrageous. You are not authorized to present financial records of a federal judge." "Actually, I am," Karoline said. "This information was obtained legally through whistleblower disclosures and public filings under the Judicial Transparency Act, Section 492B. You're a public official, Judge Harrow. Your finances aren't sacred when they intersect with your rulings." She flipped another page. "April 8th, $75,000 deposited, one day after your ruling against Renew America Legal Fund. A case where their evidence, like today's, was dismissed before hearing. Another transfer from Liberty Advancement." Judge Harrow's face darkened. He reached for his gavel again, but this time paused. His eyes darted to the audience, then to the court officer standing behind him, who wasn't moving, who, in fact, looked uneasy. "Baseless conjecture," Harrow snapped. "You're linking dates and trying to imply motive. That's not how law works." "Then let's talk motive," Karoline said, her voice sharp now. "Unity Trust Foundation's bank records show a legal defense budget of $35,000. They couldn't afford a proper team until a donor stepped in and flagged irregularities. That's when we started digging." She pulled out a color printout, headshots and names. 3 organizations. 3 conservative nonprofits, all ruled against by you. All filed motions to present audit evidence that was sealed, suppressed, or struck down by your court. And in each case, within 72 hours, your offshore account shows unexplained deposits. No one's accusing you yet, she added, cold and careful. We're just asking questions. Questions that this court deserves to hear answered. Harrow stood up, towering behind the bench. This is a circus, he shouted. You're playing politics in my courtroom. But Karoline didn't blink. And you're playing God, she said flatly. The difference is, I have the receipts. Her words cut like a blade. The binder remained open in front of her, tabbed and marked. Her hands rested calmly on its edges, steady as stone. In that moment, the image was unforgettable. The seasoned judge, unraveling behind his bench, and a young press secretary, poised and methodical, laying bare the bones of corruption. And everyone knew they were only just getting started. The shift was subtle but seismic. Judge Bennett Harrow no longer sat with the poise of a man in control. He perched at the edge of his bench now, fingers white-knuckled against the armrest, as if bracing for an incoming blow. Karoline Leavitt, steady as a metronome, flipped to a new section of her binder. Let's continue, she said, her voice calm, nearly conversational. Exhibit D, April 10th. A ruling you issued against the Jefferson Liberty Initiative was notably swift. You dismissed their fraud counterclaim before discovery. The next morning, $95,000 was deposited into the same BH consulting account, traced again to a Liberty Advancement shell firm, routed through a Panamanian intermediary. Would you like the wire ID? Gasps swept the room like wind through dry grass. Judge Harrow didn't answer. His throat worked visibly as he swallowed, but no sound followed. Karoline stepped forward slightly, placing a printed bank statement onto the evidence table beside the clerk. The timing's not subtle. 3 rulings, 3 wire transfers, all within 24 hours of judgment. These aren't coincidences, Your Honor. They're patterns. And patterns backed by evidence. I've never seen that document, Harrow said suddenly, his voice higher than before, brittle at the edges. You expect the court to believe I'm receiving bribes from advocacy groups? Based on foreign wire transfers? This is slander. Karoline didn't flinch. Slander is when there's no proof, she replied. This is documented, registered, and tied directly to your electronic signature used to authorize withdrawals. She turned the page again, revealing a scanned image projected onto the courtroom screen. There it was. An official email from Harrow's judicial address to a Liberty Advancement contact. Subject line, Update on Foundation Ruling. The body read simply, Thanks for the timely support. As promised, decision went as planned. Let me know when the next case comes up. A stunned silence fell over the room. Judge Harrow's eyes locked on the screen as if trying to will it into non-existence. Then, suddenly, his chair scraped back with a screech. This is fake, he shouted, rising to his feet. Anyone could have written that. You can't verify its origin. Karoline didn't raise her voice. Instead, she reached into her folder and held up a printed chain of email headers, routing metadata, and timestamps, all matching Harrow's judicial server. We already have. And so has the Inspector General's office. Judge Harrow swayed for a moment, grabbing the bench for balance. His face had drained of all color now, beads of sweat dotting his temple. The audience watched, transfixed. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to act. Do you want to see more? Karoline asked. Or should we talk about the memo you sent on May 2nd regarding the Wilson Family Defense Fund case? Harrow's head jerked. That case is sealed, he snapped. Yes, she said, and you sealed it 2 hours after receiving a $150,000 wire from a Liberty Link holding company. We have the transaction record. And the memo you wrote instructing your clerk to shred the family's audit documents before the hearing. The clerk at the front of the room, Julia Crane, let out an audible whimper and buried her face in her hands. Karoline paused. Miss Crane, she asked gently, would you like to speak? Julia trembled. Slowly she looked up, her eyes filled with panic and shame. He told me to, she whispered. He said if I didn't destroy the audit report I'd be fired, that my career would be over. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. The dam cracked. The courtroom burst into gasps and murmurs. Phones were up again, cameras rolling, capturing every word, every tremble. Judge Hero staggered back as if struck. "This is a setup," he roared, voice cracking. "A political ambush." Karoline's gaze was cold, relentless. "Then explain the wires, the emails, the shredded documents, the sealed cases, the bribes. If this is a setup, Your Honor, why is your name on every receipt?" The room went still again. Judge Harrell stared at her, mouth open, but no words came. He looked down at the papers on the desk before him like they were bombs about to go off, and in many ways, they were. Karoline didn't move a muscle as the room simmered on the edge of combustion. The tension was thick enough to snap. Judge Harrow stood at the bench, breath shallow, sweat trailing down his temple, rage and fear warring across his face. And that was when she reached into her blazer pocket and drew out a slim black recording device. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "I think you'll recognize this voice." Without waiting for permission, she pressed play. The audio crackled briefly, then came a gravelly voice. Unmistakable. Irrefutable. "I don't want those Unity Trust files in the record. If the clerk asks, say they were misfiled. If anyone presses, just say they're gone. We need the ruling tight and fast." A wave of shocked gasps swept through the courtroom, like a gust of wind through dry leaves. Several people shouted, phones instantly lifted in shaky hands, red recording lights blinking from every angle. The voice continued on the recorder, low and cold. "Tell Liberty Advancement it's done. Next time I want the money cleared before the hearing." The sound echoed through the chamber, bouncing off stone walls like the voice of guilt made manifest. Judge Harrow's mouth fell open. He reached forward with a jerky motion, as if to grab the device, but stopped midway, realizing how that would look. Karoline didn't flinch. She held the recorder steady in her palm, gaze unwavering. "Fake," Harrow rasped hoarsely. "Anyone could have edited that. AI, deepfakes, whatever you want. This is a trick." But it wasn't a trick, not when Julia Crane, the court clerk, suddenly burst into tears. "He said it," she cried, her hands covering her face. "He said all of that in his chambers." Right before the Unity Trust hearing, the sound of her confession sliced through the air like a blade. "He made me delete files. He told me if I didn't, he'd bury me in the system. He said he was the law." Gasps again, louder this time. From the back row, a woman stood up, hand over her mouth. "This is unbelievable," she whispered. And beside her, a man muttered, "It's not. This is what they do when no one's watching." Judge Harrow lunged forward suddenly, eyes wild. "Stop this!" he bellowed. "Shut it off! That recording is inadmissible. She has no right. She's not even an attorney." But his voice cracked at the edges, desperation seeping in like water through a crack in concrete. His gavel, his once mighty weapon of courtroom control, sat uselessly beside him, untouched since Karoline pressed play. Karoline stepped back, letting the silence return. "Your voice," she said softly, "did the damage. Not me." Harrow's eyes darted around the courtroom like a trapped animal, scanning for allies and finding none. Even the bailiff, once impassive, now looked uncomfortable. The defense attorney, Avery Sinclair, stood slowly from her seat, clearing her throat. "Your Honor," she said with quiet strength. "The recording matches the timeline of the Unity Trust case. The voice ID can be verified. And the files reference, the ones you claimed were never submitted, were listed in the original discovery logs. The audio confirms manipulation. Which means—" "I said shut up," Harrow roared, pointing at her with a trembling hand. "You're all in on this. Her, the clerk, the press secretary. This is a coup." But no one was listening anymore. The courtroom had turned against him. The people weren't just recording, they were witnessing a reckoning. "You want another one?" Karoline asked, lifting the recorder. "We haven't even played the Wilson case tape yet." The judge let out a sound somewhere between a groan and a whimper. He backed up, shaking his head. No, you don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Karoline replied, "exposing the truth." And then, softly, she pressed play again. "Tell the Wilson audit team to reschedule. I don't care what evidence they have, we're sealing the case. Liberty needs this one buried." The dam burst. The gallery erupted, shouting, yelling, people standing and screaming for Harrow's removal. One woman pointed at him and shouted, "Arrest him!" Another man yelled, "You're done, Harrow, we see you now." Judge Harrow staggered backward, his composure in tatters, arms flailing toward the exit behind the bench, but the court officer near the door took a single step forward and closed it. The click of the lock was the final note in a courtroom symphony, now overtaken by fury, disbelief, and unstoppable momentum. Justice was no longer a quiet concept, it was a wildfire, and Harrow was squarely in its path. Just when it seemed the courtroom couldn't descend any deeper into chaos, the heavy double doors at the back swung open with a loud thud. The crowd turned in unison, and a hush fell like a blanket over the room. A team of federal agents, dressed in dark tactical suits with crisp FBI patches on their arms, marched down the aisle with unwavering purpose. At their lead was Special Agent Dominic Reyes, tall and composed, his badge gleaming under the flickering overhead lights. He carried a thick leather portfolio and a warrant folded in his gloved hand. Judge Harrow froze mid-rant, his voice cutting off like a snuffed flame as he locked eyes with the man who now represented the full force of federal justice. "Judge Bennett Harrow," Reyes announced, his voice clear and thunderous, "we have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of obstruction of justice, conspiracy, abuse of power, and destruction of evidence." The room erupted, not in noise, but in stunned silence. Harrow's jaw worked uselessly, lips parted but no sound coming out. He stumbled back, knocking over his water glass in a spray that splashed across the bench. "This is a mistake," he croaked. "You can't— I'm a sitting federal judge, I have judicial immunity." Reyes didn't blink. "Immunity does not cover criminal activity," he said flatly, "and you've left a trail longer than most." He nodded once, and two agents peeled off to either side of the bench, flanking Harrow, who now looked more like a cornered animal than a man of authority. He made a sudden, desperate move toward the side door leading to his chambers, but was blocked by one of the court officers who had been silently watching since the beginning of Karoline's testimony. The officer shook his head slowly. "You're not going anywhere, sir." Harrow spun around, breath ragged. "You're all betraying me. I built this courtroom. I made careers here," he shouted, voice cracking into hysteria. Reyes stepped forward, voice dropping but gaining weight. "And you crushed more than you built. You silenced evidence, manipulated rulings, and sold verdicts to the highest bidder. That ends today." Behind him, another agent lifted a battered cardboard evidence box onto the prosecution table. "Sir," the young agent said to Reyes, "we found this stashed under the bench. Ledger files, payout records, names." He flipped the top open to reveal a stack of folders. On top, a sheet listing 7 other judges, each connected by dates and Liberty advancement payments. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even Karoline's face momentarily tightened as her eyes scanned the sheet. Reyes turned to her, a spark of recognition in his gaze. "You were right, this isn't just Harrow, it's a network." She gave a small, firm nod, and— "I'll help take them all down." Harrow, now visibly shaking, looked from face to face, searching for support. Finding only judgment. One agent read Harrow his rights as they cuffed his wrists. The final clink of metal echoed like a gavel striking the truth. As the agents turned him around to escort him down the aisle, Karoline stepped aside, arms crossed, eyes locked on him. Harrow looked back at her, face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "You think you've won, little girl," he muttered venomously. "There'll always be someone else." Karoline's voice was cool, cutting, and final. "Maybe. But today, you fell. And we're not done yet." The gavel was long forgotten, lying on the floor where Judge Harrow had dropped it during one of his earlier tirades. Now, stripped of the illusion of control and boxed in by federal agents, he stood trembling before the courtroom he once ruled like a tyrant. The handcuffs around his wrists seemed to drain the last trace of dignity from his frame. His once carefully groomed hair now clung to his forehead, damp with sweat, and his judge's robe hung off his shoulders like a burden too heavy to carry. But it wasn't over, not yet. Harrow's lips curled as he suddenly thrashed forward, yanking against the agent's grip, his voice wild with desperation. "You've got nothing," he screamed, spit flying. "This is all lies, fabrications. That recorder, those emails, they're fake. Deep fakes, AI." His voice cracked again, then slipped into something hoarse and broken. "You're all just pawns in her game." He pointed at Karoline, his hand trembling so violently the cuffs clinked with each gesture. You think you've exposed something? You think people care? They'll forget this in a week. I am the law. You can't just erase me." His voice boomed into the room, but the words fell flat. No longer commands, just empty echoes. No one responded. No one flinched. Even the gallery, once animated by outrage and disbelief, now stared at him with the same look. A quiet, collective realization that the man before them wasn't a judge anymore. Just a man, unraveling at the seams. Julia Crane, the court clerk, sobbed quietly from her seat as she covered her face. The very people Harrow once ruled over now watched as he shattered in real time. Karoline didn't move. Her arms were folded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes never left him, not out of vengeance, but out of principle. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile. She simply watched a corrupt man face the one force he couldn't manipulate: consequences. Then, in a final act of flailing desperation, Harrow lunged toward the prosecution's table, snatching the remaining documents from Karoline's evidence binder and tearing them with a shriek. "You have nothing now, no proof, no case!" The shredded paper rained down like confetti, an absurd contrast to the gravity of the moment. But Karoline calmly reached into her bag, retrieved a flash drive, and held it up like a torch. "I have backups," she said plainly, "and so does the FBI." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. A man in the back chuckled darkly. "He's done," someone whispered. Harrow slumped into the bench, panting like a man who had run out of time. You won't get away with this," he muttered. "There are people watching. They'll come for you. You'll regret this." "No," Karoline replied softly. "You'll regret what you did when no one was watching." Her voice was steady, without cruelty, but it landed like a verdict. Harrow didn't respond. His energy was gone. The agents flanked him once more and began guiding him toward the rear of the courtroom. The walk of disgrace was silent, save for the occasional click of phones capturing every step. He passed rows of spectators, some stoic, some filming, some whispering "justice" under their breath. As the doors closed behind him, the sound echoed like a final judgment. For the first time since the trial began, the courtroom felt still. Karoline let out a breath, slow and quiet, as if releasing the weight of months of preparation, sleepless nights, and relentless pursuit. Judge Bennett Harrow, the man who once declared himself untouchable, had collapsed under the very system he tried to control, and the world had watched every second of it. Minutes after Judge Harrow was escorted out in handcuffs, the courtroom remained suspended in a breathless hush. The shredded papers still scattered across the floor, the silence broken only by the quiet shuffle of court officers resetting the space. Then the side door creaked open, and a temporary replacement stepped in. Judge Alan Whitaker, an older, stern-faced man with a reputation for impartiality and zero tolerance for theatrics. He took his place at the bench without fanfare, quickly scanning the key documents that had been suppressed, misfiled, or nearly destroyed by Harrow's interference. As he turned to address the room, the entire gallery leaned forward, as though holding a collective breath. "Having reviewed the independent audits and the financial records submitted," he said in a firm, even tone, "there is no basis for the fraud charges against the Unity Trust Foundation. This case should never have been brought to trial under the presented evidence. Therefore," he lifted the gavel, its sound now a symbol of restored order, "the case is dismissed. All charges dropped." The gavel cracked like thunder, but this time it was met with a swell of applause. Quiet at first, then louder. Relief, vindication, and gratitude rising into a single wave of sound. Graham Whitmore, the silver-haired director of Unity Trust, stood from the defense table, tears welling in his eyes. He approached Karoline, voice cracking. "You saved us," he said, barely louder than a whisper. "You saved everything." Karoline placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "I didn't save anything," she replied gently. "I just told the truth. The system still has to do the rest." From the back row, someone shouted, "She's a hero!" and more applause followed. But Karoline didn't bask in it. Her gaze moved from the judge's bench to the scattered remains of Harrow's manipulation. This moment wasn't just about Unity Trust. It was about setting precedent, proving that no title, no robe, no office could shield someone from justice. As she gathered her things, flash drives and untouched documents, still neatly tucked in her binder, she knew this wasn't the end. It was the first of many battles, and today, justice had taken one giant step forward. As Karoline stepped through the courthouse doors, the scene outside erupted like a dam breaking. A crowd had gathered, supporters, journalists, protesters, all pressed behind the barriers set up by Capitol Police. Microphones extended like weapons from the sea of reporters. Flashbulbs exploded. The chant started faintly at first, then grew into a roar. "Justice for the people!" Some held homemade signs, "Thank you, Karoline, no one is above the law," and "Judges are not gods." A reporter from a major network shouted over the chaos, "Ms. Leavitt, what's your response to Judge Harrow's arrest?" Karoline paused at the top of the courthouse steps, binder tucked tightly under her arm, and faced the cameras with calm, focused resolve. "Today," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the noise like a razor, "we proved something simple but powerful. No one is above the law, not even a judge. Judge Harrow used his position to target the innocent, protect the corrupt, and pervert justice. But facts don't care about robes, and the truth always finds a way out." The quote would go viral within minutes. "Leavitt for Justice" trended across social platforms. One user posted a photo of her facing the crowd, captioned, "She didn't blink, she didn't back down. Gen Z just took down a federal judge." The footage of Harrow's arrest, of him lunging and screaming in cuffs, flooded every major outlet. Memes, reels, and breakdown threads lit up the internet. But beyond the spectacle, something deeper stirred. Karoline's evidence had exposed not just Harrow, but an entire network of judicial corruption, and the public knew it. As the crowd continued cheering, Special Agent Reyes emerged from the courthouse behind her, flanked by 2 FBI agents carrying boxes of seized documents. He nodded at Karoline as he passed, then turned to address a separate group of reporters. "We've opened a broader investigation," he announced. "Judge Harrow is not the only one. We've identified several additional judges tied to the Liberty Advancement Network. We are pursuing it all." The crowd's tone shifted from celebration to determination. The truth wasn't just revealed, it had become a rallying cry. Young activists circulated QR codes linking to transparency petitions. Legal scholars began dissecting the implications. Political commentators across the spectrum, left, right, and center, agreed something had changed. Karoline descended the steps slowly, pushing past the microphones without further comment. This wasn't about celebrity, it was about momentum. Behind her, the crowd swelled. Ahead of her, a movement had begun, and she was ready to lead it. The quiet hum of the suburban street was a sharp contrast to the electric storm Karoline had just walked through. As her car pulled into the driveway, the chaos of cameras, chants, and flashing lights seemed like a world away. Inside the house, the air smelled of lavender and formula. Home. She opened the front door, heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The living room light was warm and low, and there he was, Nicholas, her husband, standing barefoot in sweatpants, cradling their 8-month-old son in his arms. His face lit up the moment he saw her. "You're back," he said with a quiet kind of awe, stepping forward. Their son squealed, tiny hands reaching out. Karoline dropped her binder on the side table and scooped her child into her arms, holding him close, burying her face in his softness. The exhaustion finally hit, the adrenaline draining all at once, but so did the relief. "Hey, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking a little. "Mommy did something big today." She kissed his forehead, her eyes stinging. Nicholas wrapped an arm around her, anchoring her. "You were incredible," he said, voice low, thick with emotion. "I watched everything. Harrow's face when you played that tape. I've never seen anything like it." She let out a small laugh, half exhaustion, half disbelief. "I didn't think it would happen like that. I thought he'd deny it, stall, try to twist the narrative. But when I played that first recording and Julia broke down, it was like the whole system cracked open." Nicholas gently took their son back and rocked him toward the nursery. "You didn't just win a case, Karoline. You cracked the surface of something huge." She followed him, pausing at the doorway to the child's room, where soft stars glowed on the ceiling. "It's not over," she said. "The FBI found names, other judges, other cases. Harrow was just the beginning." Nicholas turned to her, expression serious but proud. "And I know you won't stop. That's who you are." Karoline nodded slowly, gaze fixed on her son now curling into sleep, utterly unaware of the battle his mother had just fought to protect a country he would grow up in. Later, alone in her office, Karoline opened her laptop and checked her feed. Thousands of notifications poured in, messages of support, calls for accountability, and the hashtag #LeavittForJustice trending at the top. She tapped out a quick post. "Today was step 1. The fight for truth and accountability is just beginning. Thank you all. Let's keep going." She hit send, then closed the laptop. The storm was far from over, but for now, there was peace in the quiet. And tomorrow, she'd be ready to fight again. The story of Karoline Leavitt's courtroom confrontation with Judge Harrow teaches a powerful and timely lesson. No one is above accountability, not even those who wear the robes of justice. In an era where trust in institutions is often shaken, this story reminds us that truth, when wielded with courage and evidence, can shatter even the most deeply entrenched corruption. Karoline didn't hold legal power in the courtroom. She wasn't a lawyer or judge, but she held something more powerful: facts, integrity, and the will to speak when silence was easier. Her actions show that exposing injustice doesn't require status, only the conviction to stand firm when the odds and the system are stacked against you. It also highlights how abuse of power thrives in darkness, but with transparency and fearless individuals, even the untouchable can fall. The lesson is clear: justice isn't just the job of the courts, it's the responsibility of every citizen who dares to speak up. Karoline's story is a call to action for anyone who believes the system can be better and is willing to do something about it. In the end, justice prevailed not because the system worked, but because someone was brave enough to challenge it.